In the hottest, most unforgiving desert in America, death does not just come, it lingers. Furnace Creek, a place of blinding sun and shimmering horizons, carries a reputation that stretches beyond simple danger. On the surface, it is a wonder of nature, vast salt flats glowing under endless skies, jagged mountains painted red by the dying sun, and an air of silence that feels almost sacred. But beneath that beauty lies something far darker. Here, tragedies are not rare. They repeat. Wanderers collapse miles from their camps, campers vanish without explanation, and sudden deaths leave investigators with more questions than answers. Some claim it's the heat, others whisper curses, and a few insist that Furnace Creek itself remembers every soul it claims. He was known only by the name scribbled in a weathered journal, Thomas Hale, a drifter, a man who carried little more than a backpack, a map with hand-drawn markings and a thirst for something undefined. In the autumn of 1997, he entered Furnace Creek with quiet confidence. The last sighting was at a gas station where he bought 2 gallons of water and a pack of matches. He told the attendant he was going to walk the desert just to feel it. No one saw him alive again. For days, the desert gave no sign of him. Search teams scoured the cracked earth, their boots crunching against salt deposits, eyes scanning the endless horizon. It was 6 days later when they found him. Thomas was lying face down in a dry wash, his skin blistered from the sun, lips cracked and water jugs long emptied. At first glance, it looked like another tragic story of heat and dehydration. But then the details began to fracture the narrative. His body told a different story. Though sunburned and dehydrated, his arms and ribs bore deep bruises, marks that suggested impact or restraint. Investigators noted the pattern, symmetrical bruising on both wrists, as if someone had gripped him tightly, though no other person was known to have been with him. Stranger still, the bruises were dark and fresh, as if inflicted in the hours before his death. Yet there were no footprints, no drag marks, and no evidence of a struggle around the site. It was as though the desert had reached out and held him down. His belongings only deepened the mystery. The journal, half buried in the sand, contained fragmented entries. The handwriting grew erratic, slanted, and desperate as the days passed. On day 2, he described the silence of the valley, so heavy it pressed against his skull. On day 3, he wrote about shapes in the distance, mirages that shimmered like people standing in the heat haze, only to vanish when he blinked. On day 4, a single line, "They are walking beside me now." The final entry, dated the day before his body was found, was nearly illegible. Not alone. Can't see their faces. What unsettled investigators further was what was missing. His map and one of the water jugs had vanished. His boots, oddly enough, were neatly placed side by side near a cluster of rocks, several yards from where his body was discovered. Locals whispered that the desert demands respect, that taking off one's boots in the salt flats is like surrendering your will to survive. The coroner's report confirmed death by dehydration and exposure, but left notes on the bruises that could not be reconciled. No animals were known to leave such markings, and no evidence pointed to foul play. The case was closed, but the questions lingered. How could a man die of dehydration while leaving behind physical signs that spoke of struggle? Who or what had left those marks on his body in the middle of nowhere? Stories of Thomas Hale spread quickly among Furnace Creek locals. Some called him reckless, a victim of arrogance against the desert. Others claimed he had stumbled into something older, a force that protects its secrets by consuming the curious. For travelers, his death became a cautionary tale. The desert doesn't just exhaust you, it watches, and sometimes it holds you down. And Thomas Hale's story was not an isolated one. He was just the first among many who entered Furnace Creek seeking solitude or discovery, and found only silence that never let them go. For most who visit Furnace Creek, the inn is meant to be a sanctuary, Built in the 1920s, the historic Furnace Creek Inn rises like an oasis from the desert floor. White stucco walls, palm trees swaying in the rare breeze, a sparkling pool that promises relief from the heat. To the weary traveler, it feels like salvation, a place where the dangers of the desert are held at bay by the comforts of civilization. But step inside and you'll quickly find that the hotel has a history that whispers something different. The official records list them as unfortunate accidents, tragic suicides, or unexplained medical events. But the number of incidents within those walls is far higher than any hotel of its size should endure. Guests have been found lifeless in their rooms, sometimes with no clear cause of death. One man was discovered sitting upright in bed, his eyes wide open, his expression frozen in terror. There was no sign of struggle, no medical condition on record, just a single sheet of paper on the nightstand with a sentence scrawled across it. "The hallway won't let me leave." Other reports from staff and visitors add to the inn's chilling reputation. A housekeeper claimed she saw a tall shadow move across the hallway, even though every room on the floor was empty. A newlywed couple checking out in the morning described a night of scratching sounds on their door, as though fingernails dragged across the wood from dusk until dawn. When they opened it in the morning, no marks were left behind. And then there are the sudden sicknesses, healthy guests who become weak, dizzy, or violently ill only while inside their rooms. Symptoms that vanish the moment they step outside. Skeptics point to stress, heat stroke, or desert dehydration. But others believe the inn is a trap disguised as a haven, a place that lures travelers closer to the heart of Furnace Creek and then holds them there. Psychologists studying the accounts noted how many victims reported feelings of being watched, followed, or pressed upon by invisible weight. The very structure of the inn, with its long, dim corridors and arched windows, seems to invite paranoia. For some, the sense of comfort turns quickly into suffocation. The most disturbing part is the pattern. Records show that deaths cluster around specific rooms, always on the upper floors, always at the farthest end of the hallways. Employees avoid those rooms when they can, quietly referring to them as the still ones. Guests who stay in them often complain of vivid nightmares, being dragged into the desert, standing barefoot in salt flats, or waking to see a figure at the edge of the bed. Some never wake again. One story circulates among the staff of a woman who checked in alone and spent the evening at the bar chatting happily with other guests. She retired early, leaving a glass half full of wine behind. In the morning, her room was locked from the inside. When staff forced the door open, she was found on the floor with no signs of trauma, as though she had simply collapsed. The unsettling detail: the clock on the wall had stopped at 3:15 a.m., though no power outage had been recorded. The Furnace Creek Inn was built to be an escape from the wilderness, but for many, it has become a final stop. How can a place designed for rest and comfort bear such a history of tragedy? Why do so many who enter its walls leave in silence? And if the supposed oasis offers no safety, what chance does a traveler have when they step back out into the endless desert, where even the horizon seems to conspire against them? Badwater Basin stretches wide and merciless, a gleaming white sea of salt that reflects the sun like a mirror. Standing there, it feels endless, an ocean without water, flat in every direction, so open it can trick the eye into believing the horizon is shifting. For one couple, the salt flats became a graveyard. They were tourists, a husband and wife from Nevada who thought they could handle a short drive through the basin on their way to Furnace Creek. But when their old sedan sputtered to a stop in the middle of the flats, their sanctuary of air conditioning was gone. The car became an oven, and with no passing traffic in sight, they made the fatal decision to walk. What followed was a mystery that investigators still can't fully explain. Their bodies weren't found together. Search teams discovered the husband first, 5 miles from the vehicle. His footprints painted a strange picture: circling, backtracking, forming erratic loops across the salt. To some, it looked like the aimless wandering of a man succumbing to heatstroke and delirium. But others noticed the pattern seemed too deliberate, as if he had been walking in circles for a reason he couldn't or wouldn't escape. The wife's body was discovered nearly 2 miles away, lying face up, clutching an object in her palm. It was her wristwatch, warped and half-melted, though the day's temperatures had not been high enough to melt metal. Investigators were baffled. Some claimed it was damaged by the sun and salt reacting together. Others whispered that the watch had stopped in her final moments, leaving its face frozen at 4:12 p.m. The exact time no one could explain. What disturbed searchers most was her expression. Unlike her husband, whose face bore the signs of exhaustion and desperation, she appeared strangely calm. Her eyes were closed, her lips faintly parted, almost as though she had lain down to rest. And yet, her fingernails were bloodied, showing she had clawed into the salt before death claimed her. The open expanse of the salt flats should have offered clarity, a horizon in every direction, a view that stretches for miles. But in that openness lies its greatest horror, disorientation so complete that direction, distance, and even time itself become untrustworthy. Survivors of similar ordeals speak of mirages, phantom shapes flickering on the horizon, or the haunting sound of footsteps echoing where no one is. Some say the silence becomes so overwhelming that the mind invents company, conjuring figures in the haze. Others insist the company is real. In the days after their discovery, rangers returned to examine the scene. They noted how quickly the desert erases signs of struggle. Winds covered tracks, salt crusts closed over disturbed ground, and before long, it was as if the couple had never been there at all. Only the looping footprints, etched deeper into the earth than usual, resisted the elements. They lingered for weeks before finally vanishing. To this day, visitors sometimes pause near the spot where the car was found. Locals warn that if you stand too long, you'll feel it too. The pull of the horizon, the sense of being led somewhere just out of reach. Some say the couple lost themselves in the confusion of heat and fear. But others believe that on the salt flats, no one truly walks alone. Long before Furnace Creek became a stop for tourists chasing heat records and desert sunsets, it was a place of labor, sweat, and silent death. In the late 1800s, the borax mines carved deep scars into the desert hills. Men arrived desperate for work, drawn by the promise of wages, but what they found was a landscape that seemed determined to take more than it gave. The heat was relentless, the air dry enough to crack skin, and the tunnels, carved into brittle rock, were as unstable as the men's nerves. Many never returned from those shafts. Officially, their deaths were recorded as collapses, heatstroke, or accidents with tools, but those who worked alongside them whispered different explanations. Stories spread of miners vanishing without warning, swallowed by sudden fissures in the earth. Their picks and lanterns were sometimes found days later, lying neatly on the ground miles away from the tunnels, as though carried there by unseen hands. By lantern light, shadows seemed to dance with too much intention. Men swore they saw figures at the edges of the dark, shapes that never drew closer yet never left. Some refused to work alone, insisting that when they did, they heard footsteps following in rhythm with their own. It wasn't long before whispers of a curse took hold, spreading through campfires like smoke. The desert, they said, did not forgive those who dug into its bones. One miner's journal, recovered after his death in a shaft collapse, contained entries that still unsettled historians. In shaky handwriting, he wrote of a presence deep underground, one that pressed on his chest, made breathing heavy, and filled his ears with a low hum. His final entry read, "The walls are moving tonight. If I don't return, tell them the mine took me." He never walked out again. Folklore grew from these tragedies. Locals told of the restless crew, spirits of miners still wandering the shafts, searching for the surface but doomed never to find it. Lanterns would flicker violently in certain tunnels, even without wind, and some miners swore that the faint glow of lights could be seen deep underground, where no man had ventured in decades. When operations ceased, the desert began reclaiming the old shafts. Collapses sealed many entrances, but some remain hidden, marked only by subtle depressions in the ground. Hikers who wander too close tell of sudden dizziness, disorientation, or the eerie feeling of being pulled downward. A few even report hearing metallic clinks echoing beneath the earth, as if the miners are still working in eternal shifts, bound by a contract they never agreed to. The curse of Furnace Creek's miners may have begun with men and their suffering, but the land seems to have absorbed their unrest, and some believe it didn't end when the last shaft closed. It only spread, seeping into the valley above, leaving a shadow over anyone who dares disturb the silence, because in Furnace Creek, not all who vanish do so under the sun. Some are claimed by the darkness below. Furnace Creek is known for extremes. The highest temperatures ever recorded on Earth scorch its valleys, yet thousands of tourists visit each year, prepared, hydrated, shaded, and cautious. But even preparation has not saved everyone. In recent decades, a string of baffling deaths has left investigators uneasy. These were not cases of careless hikers who forgot water, nor thrill-seekers pushing too far. They were ordinary visitors, equipped and careful, who died suddenly in ways science still struggles to explain. One such case involved a young German tourist, an experienced desert traveler who carried more than enough supplies. When her body was discovered, her water containers were still half full, her clothing intact, and there were no signs of distress around her campsite. Yet, the autopsy revealed catastrophic organ failure, her heart and liver seared as though they had endured prolonged overheating. Strangely, her body temperature at the time of discovery was not consistent with heat stroke. It was as if something inside her had burned, while the outside remained untouched. Another death involved a middle-aged man who collapsed along a well-traveled path. Witnesses reported that he simply staggered, gasped once, and fell. Emergency responders arrived quickly, yet his pulse was gone within minutes. Medical examiners could not determine a cause. His body showed no sign of exhaustion, no dehydration, and no trauma. His lungs, however, displayed strange blistering, as though he had inhaled air far hotter than the environment around him. These cases haunt the medical records. Forensic notes describe thermal stress inconsistent with exposure and internal collapse without external trigger. What unsettles experts most is that these victims were healthy, hydrated, and far from the reckless profiles usually associated with desert deaths. They were people who should have survived. Locals whisper about these tragedies in hushed tones, calling them deaths from the inside out. Some suggest the desert carries unseen pockets of superheated air, invisible traps waiting for the unlucky. Others insist it's psychological, that the stress of the environment causes sudden breakdown. But such explanations never account for the peculiar damage written across these bodies. For the families left behind, closure is elusive. Death certificates list vague terms: probable heat-related event, suspected environmental factors. But those words feel hollow against the reality that their loved ones were found surrounded by untouched supplies, their precautions useless. The desert, it seems, doesn't always play by rules of science or survival. Psychologists studying Furnace Creek note the terror these stories provoke because they strike at a deeper fear. The idea of an invisible killer, one you cannot prepare for, defend against, or even see. To walk into the valley is to accept that sometimes survival has nothing to do with preparation and everything to do with chance. And so the chilling question lingers in every account: what if it isn't the heat at all, but something hidden within Furnace Creek itself? In the late summer of 1982, three friends set out for what was supposed to be a weekend of stargazing and quiet camping near Furnace Creek. They were young, adventurous, and prepared. Their tent was pitched on a patch of level ground not far from the main road, their cooler filled with supplies, their lanterns burning late into the night. By all accounts, they were careful and responsible. Yet when rangers stumbled across their campsite a week later, the scene told a story that still has no ending. The tent stood perfectly intact, its zippers closed, sleeping bags neatly laid out inside. A small campfire had burned down to ash, half-consumed logs still arranged as though someone had stepped away only moments earlier. Their backpacks were untouched, wallets and identification left in plain sight. Even their car keys were resting on a folded jacket near the entrance. Nothing was missing except the campers themselves. The search that followed was extensive. Helicopters scanned the valley, ground teams scoured canyons and washes, and dogs were brought in to follow trails. They found footprints leading away from the campsite, but only for a short distance before they simply vanished, swallowed by the shifting sand and salt. No bodies, no belongings, no evidence of violence or flight were ever discovered. Theories spread quickly. Some whispered of a mountain lion attack, though no blood or signs of struggle could be found. Others speculated that the trio had grown disoriented and wandered off, but if that were the case, why leave behind everything that could have kept them alive? Stranger still, the footprints suggested they left calmly side by side as if following someone or something into the night. Locals leaned into darker explanations. Some claimed the group encountered a cult rumored to operate in the desert during the 1980s, drawn into rituals that ended in silence. Others pointed to Furnace Creek's long history of vanishings, suggesting the land itself lures travelers deeper until they are erased. Campers who later stayed in the same region reported uneasy feelings. The sense of being observed and, on more than one occasion, faint laughter carried on the dry wind at night. To this day, the case remains open, though decades have passed without a trace. Families of the missing still leave flowers at the ranger station, small reminders that 3 lives were swallowed by the valley without a whisper of what happened. The campsite, photographed and catalogued, remains one of the eeriest images in Furnace Creek's archives, a place of warmth and companionship suddenly frozen in time, abandoned in perfect order. It's not just death that haunts Furnace Creek, it's disappearance. A place where people can step out of their tent, out of their lives, and into a silence that leaves no trace behind. Because Furnace Creek doesn't just kill, sometimes it erases. Furnace Creek is infamous for its heat, for the way the sun seems to peel the earth apart and the air shimmers as if it's alive. But visitors and locals alike whisper about stranger moments, times when the desert seems to bend its own rules, twisting nature into shapes that don't belong. These are not legends told at campfires. They are documented accounts, strange weather events, so out of place that even science offers only fragments of explanation. One of the most chilling involves sudden plunges in temperature. Hikers have reported walking beneath the blazing sun, sweat stinging their eyes, only to step into patches of air so cold their breath fogged instantly. One man described it as walking through a freezer with no walls. He made it back, shaken but alive. Others have not been so fortunate. A pair of tourists collapsed within minutes of each other, their bodies showing signs of hypothermia, even as the desert temperature hovered above 110 degrees. Then there are the storms. Not the rain-bearing kind, but bursts of static that crackle through the air like invisible lightning. Campers have described hearing loud pops around their tents at night, followed by hair standing on end and the ground buzzing beneath them. These storms leave no clouds, no rain, no aftermath, only the echo of electricity and, in some cases, the lingering numbness of skin as if touched by something unseen. Perhaps most unsettling are the reports of black fog. Mirage-like at first, it appears on the horizon as a shifting wall of darkness, rolling across the salt flats without sound. Those who've seen it claim the fog swallows light, dulling lanterns and flashlights to a weak glow. One ranger who encountered it wrote in his logbook that stepping inside felt like being buried alive in silence. When he stumbled out minutes later, his watch had stopped and he couldn't account for nearly half an hour of missing time. Skeptics dismiss these stories as tricks of heat and exhaustion, mirages, dehydration, and the fragile human mind unraveling in isolation. Yet, too many of the accounts end with real consequences: unexplained deaths, collapsed hikers, clocks frozen mid-tick. These anomalies don't just unsettle, they end lives, leaving behind bodies with conflicting signs. Heatstroke on the outside, frostbite on the inside, as though the desert rewrote its own rules for those unlucky enough to cross its threshold. Furnace Creek is already lethal in its natural state, but when the weather itself bends into impossible shapes, cold within heat, silence within storms, darkness where there should be light, it feels less like climate and more like intention, as though the land enjoys playing with human survival, offering glimpses of escape before tightening its grip. And if even nature itself cannot be trusted here, what chance does anyone truly have when stepping into Furnace Creek? Step back from the individual stories, the drifter who never returned, the haunting at the hotel, the couple lost on the salt flats, the vanished campers, and a larger picture begins to form. Each tale is chilling in isolation, but it's when the events are compared that the shadows deepen. Furnace Creek, it seems, doesn't take it random. There are patterns here. Consider the geography. Many of the tragedies occur within a tight circle around Badwater Basin and the Furnace Creek Wash. Hikers collapse not in distant corners of Death Valley, but in the same swath of land where miners once vanished. Campers disappear near trails that cut across old borax routes. Even the hotel deaths tend to occur in rooms that overlook this same stretch of desert. It's as though the land itself has drawn a boundary line, keeping its secrets within. Then there is the timing. Records reveal a chilling repetition, a spike in disappearances during late summer, particularly in August, when the desert is at its most oppressive. Rescue teams note that calls for missing persons cluster around the same weeks, sometimes even the same days, year after year. Locals have learned to expect it, though few speak openly. They simply say, "The creek takes its due." The anomalies themselves follow patterns too. Bruises on bodies where there should be none, watches that stop at specific hours, belongings neatly arranged, footprints leading nowhere. One ranger noted that in nearly every unsolved case there is at least one detail that suggests order instead of chaos. It's never the messy randomness of panic or accident. It feels intentional, like someone or something has arranged the scene before walking away. Psychologists studying these cases point to human perception. We crave patterns even in chaos, and perhaps the desert's emptiness makes our minds stitch stories where there are none. But even those explanations fall apart against the sheer weight of repetition. When 20 different deaths share unexplainable similarities, coincidence begins to feel less like chance and more like design. Some theories lean into folklore. Old miners once claimed the valley demanded sacrifice, that for every load of borax pulled from its soil, a life would eventually be taken. Others suggest the land is cursed by centuries of suffering, native peoples, workers, wanderers, etched into the ground until it bleeds tragedy. And then there are modern voices, whispering about magnetic anomalies, distortions in time, or something buried beneath the earth that feeds off those who linger too long. The unsettling truth is that the more the stories are told, the clearer the pattern becomes. Furnace Creek does not strike like lightning, randomly and without warning. It selects. Travelers prepared for heatstroke fall from invisible forces. Campers vanish in neat silence while their belongings remain. Healthy hearts fail in the same season, in the same barren stretch of desert.
It's not chaos, it's rhythm, and that rhythm echoes in every death.
When people die here, it feels less like an accident and more like an offering. So what then is Furnace Creek?
A landscape of extremes, or something far older, far hungrier than the maps admit.
That question leads us into the final truth lingering in the valley's silence, a truth that suggests this desert does not merely hold the memory of death, it keeps it alive. Furnace Creek has always been a paradox, an oasis framed by lifeless salt, a place where beauty and desolation share the same breath. To some, it is simply a stretch of desert, harsh but explainable, where heat, exhaustion, and human error create tragedy. But for others, it is more than land, it is presence. The silence here does not merely surround you, it seeps into you as though the valley itself is listening. Perhaps the mysteries are only reflections of our own fears, magnified by emptiness. The desert strips away distractions until all that remains is the raw truth of survival. When people vanish, when watches stop, when bruises appear without cause, maybe it is the human mind unraveling against the weight of nothingness. Maybe Furnace Creek is only a mirror showing us what we bring into it: fear, frailty, fragility. And yet, the stories resist such tidy explanations. Too many patterns repeat. Too many deaths occur with details that logic does not comfortably fit. Watches melting when they shouldn't, footsteps looping with no end, shadows moving through hotel corridors long after the doors are locked. If these are coincidences, then the desert has a cruel talent for creating them. If they are not, then Furnace Creek is not passive land. It is alive in ways we cannot yet measure, alive or aware. Perhaps the desert remembers the miners lost beneath its surface, the wanderers who begged the horizon for mercy, the travelers who collapsed with water still in their hands. And perhaps it keeps those memories not as history, but as hunger. That is the haunting choice left to anyone who dares stand in its silence. Are these tragedies only natural? Or does the land itself decide who leaves and who does not? For every mystery, there is a theory. For every theory, there is a gap. And in those gaps, the valley waits. The truth may never be certain. But one thing is undeniable: Furnace Creek does not let its stories go. They linger in records, in whispers, in the unease that settles over every visitor who feels the weight of unseen eyes. Because in Furnace Creek, death does not just happen, it stays. And long after the sun dips behind the red mountains, the silence will still be there, watching, remembering, and waiting for the next name it will keep.